Welcome to the Be Unstoppable podcast. Me and the team are so glad that you're joining us for this episode. Your support is invaluable, and we'd be so grateful if you could hit the subscribe button. It helps us keep bringing you amazing interviews with top-notch guests. Whether you're watching on Patreon or YouTube, or listening on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Deezer, or any other platform, subscribing really makes a difference. Thank you so much for your support. Let's get back to this episode.
Hi, I'm Christine Osazuwa. I'm a music executive based here in London, and this is the Be Unstoppable podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Be Unstoppable podcast with me, your host, Ben Wynter. Today's guest is someone who truly embodies what it means to be unstoppable. Christine Osazuwa is a trailblazer at the intersection of data, music, and marketing. She's worked with some of the biggest names in the music industry, from Warner Music to Universal Music Group to Shoobs, and has transformed the way that data is used to drive innovation. As a strategist, speaker, and founder of Measure of Music, Christine is all about empowering others to understand how technology and creativity come together to create meaningful impact. But what's most striking about Christine is her ability to merge disparate worlds, using her background in engineering, music, and business to push boundaries. She's a LinkedIn powerhouse, a thought leader, and someone who is constantly asking, how can we make this better? Today, we dive into her incredible journey, the power of data, and her insights on how to craft your career, your mindset, and your personal brand in ways that truly set you apart. So welcome to the Be Unstoppable podcast, the truly unstoppable Christine.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, Ben.
Really happy to be here with you today. And for all of our listeners, whether you're watching this or you're listening to this podcast, remember, you have the power to choose your path, but always choose to be unstoppable. Christine, let's get into this.
Let's do it.
All right, let's start at the beginning. What was it like growing up in Baltimore, Maryland? How did your environment, your family, your community shape you into who you are today? And what were the early experiences that set the stage for you to be here where you are now?
Oh, gosh, starting with big questions.
We don't hold any punches here.
Oh, gosh. Okay, so for those who don't know, Baltimore is in the States. It's on the East Coast. It's what is often referred to as a B market, meaning it's a secondary market. So an hour away is D.C., south, 90 minutes north is Philadelphia, and then like 4 hours north is New York City. So when musicians would come to the States to tour, often they skipped Baltimore, right? And so I was squarely not a music city, but I loved music from a really young age. Some of my first memories as a kid was listening to my dad's records in the living room and dancing around, listening to like Temptations with my daddy in the morning. I loved music my whole life. And so as I got older, I started to realize that was a thing you could work in. Mm-hmm. I didn't know how you could work in it. Yeah. But I remember I think I watched the MTV Music Awards, right? And I remember I'd watch an artist get on stage and they'd go, I want to thank God, I want to thank my mom. And then they start listing some people they wanted to thank. Yeah. And I remember being like 11, 12 years old, being like, I don't know who they're thanking, but I would like to be one of those people. I want to do something so important for an artist that they have just won an award. And I'm the person that came top of mind as like, I helped them get there. Yeah. And so from there, I was like, okay, this is a thing. And so when I was about 14, I started to get involved in the local music scene in Baltimore, basically. Mm-hmm. Started by going to shows, and since I, even at 14, had no chill, I found myself jobs, basically. I started running street teams for artists in Baltimore at 14. I started a magazine, a music magazine, a print one. This was back in like 2006, so it was very subversive to do print when everyone was online, obviously. But I started a print magazine when I was about 15, 16 years old, basically, about local music in my area as well. And I leveraged the fact that Baltimore was a B market to get my interviews because there weren't any publications in Baltimore. Okay. And so when artists did come through town, I was lucky enough to be able to get on the press list because it wasn't New York, and then I wasn't competing with Billboard. They
just wanted to be seen.
They're really cool. You want to do press? Who's in both? Sure, you can do press. Yeah. And so I basically leveraged the fact that I was in the B market to be able to introduce some of my favorite bands, some of my favorite artists when I was like 15, 16 years old. Mm-hmm. And I started booking shows around that time as well. And so that was like my first few, that's how I got my start in music, was just like figuring it out and piecing it together and actually using the fact that I wasn't in a huge music market to my advantage.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like yourself, I started on a street team, handing out flyers for, for some of the younger generation that might be tuned in. Street teams are where you hand out flyers, you went to clubs, you posted up fly posters and boards and all the rest of it, and you just really promoted artists on behalf of a record label. And for you to set up a street team at 14, that's pretty incredible.
It was fun. I barely knew what I was doing, but you figure it out, right?
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting that, you're in a market that wasn't considered a priority market, but you leverage that and you use that to your advantage. How important is it for you to think outside the box and look at something that most people would have deemed as maybe that's a negative, and, I need to get to New York, or I need to get to somewhere where there's stuff that's really happening and it's a priority, but you kind of turned it on its head.
Yeah.
Why did you think in that way and you didn't think, let me get to New York?
New York was always there. New York was always a place I thought I'd live one day, of course. Especially because I wanted to work in music, but it was like I was biding my time. I don't think I even fully realized how much of an advantage I had until I got a bit older. Actually, when I started going to New York regularly, when I was 14, I wasn't going to New York. But once I turned, I think I went to New York on my own for the first time about 19 years old, and I realized what the stark difference was, between where I was in Baltimore and where I was in New York. But I think my whole life I was always running into this issue of you have to do what you got to do, basically. For example, when I went to apply to uni, I applied to a lot of different places and things like that. I got into a lot of really great schools, but the school that gave me a full scholarship was the school I went to. I could have gone to New York, I could have, but I could have gone to the best, quote unquote, the best school. But I was like, or I could save myself, $120,000.
Yeah.
And so I opted to go that route. And I think, it was, sometimes it may seem like it was the safe route, but I think I always made really calculated risks in my life where I'm like, cool, where do I want to be? How do I get there? And it is almost never been the conventional route. It's always never been the route that you would expect, but it's got me where I needed to go.
Yeah.
And so in hindsight, I'm really glad I made those choices. Cause I think if I went to New York, I would have ended up as a coordinator at a label and been fighting my way up for 20 plus years, as opposed to the routes I went through to get to where I am now.
Yeah. And were there specific experiences or influences that shaped your thinking in that way? Because I always find that, people that think slightly outside the box, there's usually something that happened in their childhood or a person that influenced them or an event that kind of made them think, actually, I can pivot and go this way rather than following the norm. What was it for you?
Yeah, so I've now lived in 3 countries, the UK being the most recent one. And honestly, it's my parents, right? I'm first generation American. My parents did what I did. They moved from Nigeria to the States when they were in their 20s. And so I always it's kind of this idea of anything's possible. There's nothing you can't do. And I think that's something that I really learned from my parents because they did it, right? They moved their whole lives. They started all over again. They came to a city they weren't familiar with and they figured it out. And so if they can do that, I was certain that I could do that as well. So I think that shaped a lot of who I am as a person. And there's never been a point in my life where I thought it wasn't possible, where I thought you can't do that. And my default reaction is, of course you can do that. Who says you can't?
How do you navigate that when you have that attitude? Because that's an attitude that I've had my whole life as well. I've always say everything's possible. I make the impossible possible, take the I am off it, and it just becomes possible. So what is it for you that gives you that mindset? And how do you push back against people that say, oh, be realistic, come on, that's not realistic? Because that's what people do. They take their own limitations, put it on you. How do you push back on that?
It's funny because in my head I don't even push back on it. That's not even my problem. What do we do? What do we do? It's not even my problem that what are they chattering about? I remember once there was someone who was talking. It was a story my best friend reiterated to me afterwards, and she was talking to a friend of ours, a shared friend, and the woman was like, oh God, I think I had just gotten press passes to a really big festival that's normally really hard to get to, whatever it might be. And the other friend was like, oh, how does Christine always get all this stuff? And my best friend said, I don't know, she just asks. I think sometimes people are waiting for like I always say, especially when it comes to music, is that people are like always waiting for permission.
Yeah.
People are always waiting for someone to tell them yes. People are always waiting. Like, I always joke that if you work in the music industry, most people don't even feel like they really work in the music industry. I think the only people that think they work in the music industry are like A&Rs. Everyone else, I'm like, but do I work in the industry? I mean, sometimes I'm like just opening Excel sheets, or I'm just doing something very mundane. I'm like, short of being physically in the studio, I'm like, am I in the industry? It's fine. And I think a lot of people are always waiting for this like validation. Okay, you have arrived, and now you are doing the thing, and now you are a music marketer, or now you are an artist manager, and now you are a blank. And I remember from like 15, I was like, cool, I'm a music marketer, you know. And then I started a magazine. I'm a journalist. You know, like there's no more steps to that. It's not. I'm not becoming a doctor. You know, like there's no sheet of paper. There's nothing that says you were the thing, right? And so I think my whole life, the way I've approached things is just like, if you want to do it, just do it. Who's going to stop you? Like, the person that's going to stop you, either they come help or they shut up. What do you, like, why are we concerned with that person, basically?
Yeah, it's really funny because that seems to be a running theme on this podcast. The people that come on that we interview, we had Mark Henry on here, who's Nux's manager, and he said the exact same thing. He said, don't wait for it, just do it.
Just do it.
Just do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that I'm noticing about people that are achieving. They just do it. They're not waiting for permission. They're not asking, like you said, for the yes. They just go out and they just make it happen. So.
Yeah. What, fortune favors the bold, they say, and especially in music. No matter how mad they get at you, I have to say, my whole life working in music, people might be a little annoyed at the thing I did, but they're like, well, you did it.
Sounds very familiar.
It's done. However way I did it, it's done now. So it is what it is, right?
So were there people that were in certain positions of power that helped to influence your ambition? Were there people that you looked at and said, I want to work in that space because that person is amazing? Or was it just simply that MTV Music Award moment?
Oh gosh, so I grew up like, so I don't know, I guess there's video and audio for this. So I am a little Nigerian black girl that grew up in Baltimore. Baltimore is a city that's 70% black, just for another context here. But I grew up going to punk rock shows. Like, my favorite band is Fall Out Boy and has been since I was 14 years old. I worked on Warped Tour, which is a big like music festival that took place in the States for years. And so I was always very much an other in the spaces I was in for a really long time. And so for me growing up, the people I looked up to were those that were working within that space at the highest levels. And so they were people that ran labels I really admire. Thankfully, in the years since I've gotten to work for those labels in various capacities, Fueled by Ramen, for example, was a label that I was always obsessed with. Crush Management was a management company that was representing all of the artists and bands that I really loved, for example. And so there were all these people doing this really cool stuff, and there was a lot of young people at the time. We were all figuring it out together. It felt like the people that I was looking up to in hindsight, I don't think I even realized, were probably like 5 to 10 years older than me tops. Like, we were like, everyone was in the same boat, just we're figuring this all out together. It's like, it was like just one step away from like the DIY like punk scene. It was like the pop punk scene I grew up in. And so everyone was just always figuring it out. Everyone was booking shows in like church basements and like community halls, and somehow the band that they were booking all of a sudden became really big, and they're like, oh, I guess I'm their manager now, or I'm doing the marketing, or I run this label now. And like, no one knew what they were doing. And like that chaos is something that I really thrive in, where it's like there's that ambiguity, there's that uncertainty, but like so much cool stuff comes out of just like, we're just figuring this all out together. And so when I was younger, I don't think I ever like, ironically, I did work for Atlantic Records when I was young as a consultant, when I was like, I think like 19 or so. But like, it never was my aspiration necessarily to even work at a major label. I did it twice. It wasn't really my aspiration. It was more so like, I just wanted to be doing what the cool stuff was, basically. And so I, for a long time, thought I'd be at like an indie label or something along those lines doing that kind of work. It didn't quite pan out in that way, but I've always had this ethos and obsession with like the DIY space to like figure it out. You do it, you get it done. However it takes to get it done, you just get it done, basically.
Yeah. Very independent mindset. Yes. Yeah. Say this. I feel like we're vibing. We're connected here. You know, we're. Okay, so you've had an incredible career journey. You've combined music, data, tech, and business. When you reflect on your younger self, can you point to a moment when you knew that this unconventional path was what you wanted, and how did that passion become ignited?
Oh gosh, it's funny. I'm like smiling because I'm like, have I figured that out yet? I'm like, is it what I wanted? No, I mean, so basically, I kind of always, I knew I wanted to work in music when I was really young, right? So that was the most straightforward component. So I did my undergrad degree in music business and journalism. I ended up going to a school that actually didn't have a music business major, but they had a program that you create your own major. And so this is the school that gave me all the money. UMBC, fantastic school. I love them.
Shouts to UMBC.
Yes, go Retrievers. They gave me a lot of money. We appreciate it. But they were incredibly, on top of that, incredibly supportive. And I said, hey, I want to do this thing. And they were no one ever said no, basically. They even gave me grant money to film a documentary about music when I was in school. And so it was an amazing space to work in because they had the same mentality and mindset. I remember walking into my advisor's room, like his office, like the first day to meet him, and he had a full drum kit in his room. And the room was very small. The drum kit took up half the room. So I'm like, I know where this priorities lie. We're on the same page here. Fantastic. And so I did my music business degree. And so then I knew from there, I was always going to get an MBA. So I got my MBA. My MBA was in marketing, right? And so all of this was pretty straightforward still. And then I did my master's in data science. And at that point, a lot of people were like, but what do these things have to do with each other? And I finished my master's in data science in 2014.
Okay.
And so everyone was like, what do these have to do with each other? I don't understand. I don't know how they all link together. And I was like, no, I got you. You'll see. And so the caveat there is in 2011, Spotify came to America. And I always say 2011 is the year I graduated from uni, but the best thing that happened to me is Spotify came to America. It was a life-changing thing to have the access to all the music on streaming platforms. It's really incredible. But on top of that, I recognized really early in that space that there's going to be a lot of data. That the only way this works, the only way this is powered is through a lot of data. Yeah. The predecessor, or it still exists, would be Pandora, which is only available in the US. But they were doing a lot of really interesting work with data and genres and like how music, like the actual interworkings of music from a technical standpoint, basically. And so I recognized that this was an area that's going to be really important. And so fast forward, when people start asking, well, you have all these degrees, what do they have to do with each other? After I finished school, I left the States and I moved to Stockholm for 2 years. And the job I got in Stockholm was the head of data and insights for Universal Music Group on the marketing and commercial team.
So you went straight into head of?
Oh, no, I got promoted into it a year later. Okay. So I got promoted into it. So eventually that was my first title was data analyst, and then I got promoted into head of. But basically the job I had was literally, if you combine all three of my degrees together, being my MBA was in marketing, I had that job. Yeah. A job that literally didn't exist when I started my education, basically. There's no means for it to have existed when I started my education. But from the time I started uni in 2007 to when I finished grad school, my second master's, basically in 2014, a whole new area of the music industry emerged and opened up, essentially. Yeah. And I knew that that's the space that I wanted to be in. I found the interest there really early on, basically.
So everything just kind of worked out in your favor. You did the degrees, the music industry changed, and you were like, I see a gap in the market where I can really sit and fit in. Okay, so being part of major organizations like Warner, like Universal, what's been the most surprising lessons that you've learned from being at the heart of these massive data-driven companies? Was there anything about those environments that challenged the way that you see the industry?
Yes, certainly. So I would say, the thing is, the industry changed so quickly. So in 2009, I was working for Atlantic Records as a contractor, so as a consultant, basically. I was helping manage their street team then. And at that point, we were still very much street teaming. They were still passing out flyers, passing out posters. Hey, we need you guys to all call the radio station and request a song. It was still very much that world. I finished school in 2014, moved to Stockholm in 2017, and that time span of 8 years. Everything changed, basically. Yeah. The entire industry changed. Streaming became a thing, and then a massive thing in that span of time, basically, which was incredible to watch it happen and incredible to see what that change looked like. And so when I got to Universal, I got to see the machine work in a way that I've never seen a machine work before. One of the artists I remember working that was the most interesting to watch was Billie Eilish. Like,
Okay.
I watched Billie Eilish become a star, and I watched the machine that is the Universal Music Group make that happen in a lot of ways. And that is, igniting all the different territories. Universal is represented in 70 countries, right? Give or take, right? And watching the 70 countries all come behind a single artist is like, it feels like magic. Like, it feels like like it feels like I can't explain what it truly feels like when it happens, when everything clicks together, everything works together. And I would say I was working with some of the smartest people I've ever worked with in my entire life when I was there. And the combination of the data, the insights, the passion, the gut, the heart, the caring, all combined together made it feel like phenomenal to watch that happen. And so I guess what I learned is like there I learned there's a lot of power there. And when it's leveraged right, there's always that joke that we made the right person famous. I love that saying, because sometimes you make the right person famous. Like, sometimes you make the very talented, performer that is really good and has a great songwriting team, et cetera, famous. And that's an incredible feeling. And getting to watch that happen then subsequently in other roles and for other artists watching that happen, especially when it comes to getting to watch women of color, people from emerging markets, quote unquote emerging markets, all grow and become stars. Like that, it never stops being magical.
Yeah.
Which you would think eventually it would get old. It doesn't. Every single time it's amazing, basically.
Yeah. So when you say all of the countries came together, all the different territories came together, what is it that they did to make that happen? What was your role to galvanize all the different universal organizations across the world to get behind this artist? How did they make that happen?
Yeah, so in that scenario, when I was at Universal, I was in a single territory, so that was less my job. At Warner, I was in a global role, so that was more my job. But at Universal, it was more so like everyone had to be on it, right? So for us in Sweden, it was like, cool, who's this audience? How do we leverage this audience? Who do we need to talk to? Where does she need to be? What press needs to get done? What marketing needs to get done? And it's replicating that 70 different times effectively. It's actually not as easy as it's like it does. Maybe it doesn't sound easy, but it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of work. It takes figuring out whether or not something needs to be converted into local language or not. It takes figuring out whether or not how much money to put behind it. It takes timing things properly. It takes leveraging opportunities for collaborations and things like that all simultaneously. And the thing about it also means that everyone has to be behind it. Basically, everyone has to focus on it. Everyone has to make it a priority, and everyone has to care enough to actually make it a priority, because there's also a difference between saying something's a priority and actually doing the work for it to actually be a priority.
Absolutely, yes.
There's been certainly times in my career where someone we were like, yes, that is a priority. And so watching it actually be a priority is something entirely different, and like that feels really special.
And what does your role with understanding the data, how does that fit into a process like that?
Yeah, so a lot of the work I do, a lot of the work I did, a lot of the work I still do is really squarely focused in the marketing audience, like an audience space, basically. What I aim to do often in my roles is to do audience development with the lens of data and insights. And so what that often looks like is figuring out who an artist's audience is, figuring out if there's multiple different types of groups for the audiences, figuring out if there's geographical differences, for example. And so after you work out all of that, like, okay, how many groups does an artist have? Like, how many fan bases do they have, basically? And once I finish working that out, basically, then we're able to figure out how do we market to them? How do we reach them? What are their consumption habits like? What do they enjoy? What are they listening to? What else do they consume? Things like that. I feel as an artist, you need to understand who your fans are really deeply to be able to actually meet them where they are, instead of trying to get them to come to you constantly. So an example of what that might look like is, let's say I might look at the data and figure out that there's a certain group or subset of an artist fan base that listens to music much later on than the others.
When you say later on,
so they might not listen on New Music Friday. Like the day the track comes out, they might not listen immediately, right?
Yeah.
And just because they don't listen that same day doesn't mean they're not fans. It might just mean they're busy.
Yes, absolutely.
And so let's say I figure that out. So I'll look at the data and say, okay, cool. This fan base takes 2 to 3 weeks to listen to a new track rather than on day one. And so then I'm talking to our marketing teams or our commercial teams, and I'm saying, cool, don't be concerned. Don't be concerned they haven't listened yet. They will come around to it. If they haven't listened a month in, then we're going to have to revisit and figure out what's going on. But that's not a group we need to focus on right now. We need to focus on the OG fans and get them to listen. And we want to focus on the ones that listen right away, and we want to get them to repeat listen, right?
Yeah.
And so the tactic that we have for that group is, hey, listen as many times as possible, versus the tactic we have for the busy crowd that really cool. We know you get to it eventually. We'll remind you and nudge you a few times, but we know you get around to it.
Yeah.
And so it's little things like that you have to understand about your audience, and even understanding like how creative needs to be done, what the copy needs to look like. If you have a positioning of an artist, you want to position a certain way, or even more difficult, if you want to move the positioning from an artist, if they're in one bucket and they want to move somewhere else, it's figuring out how to actually do that without alienating original fans, for example. And all of that requires a deep understanding of audiences, which is all just data and insights, essentially.
And where do you go to get these data and insights? So, it's something that we talk about a lot on this podcast, which is go to where your audience is. Because a lot of people are like, I want to be on radio, whatever. And it's like, okay, that's great. But that doesn't mean that that's your audience. Like, go to where your audience is. How do you find the right data to understand who your audience is and where they are?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where you work. I guess what you have access to. So when I was at the major labels, we get to sum up basically how the data works from the major labels is we have a database that has a line item for every single stream for every single one of our tracks.
Wow.
It's actually more complex than that even, but to sum it up, that is it. So billions of rows of data. And I code in a bunch of different languages, and I would code to get that data and turn it into something digestible and easy to understand, visualize it, et cetera, put in something digestible for artists to understand, things like that. And that's available to you if you work at the major labels. Now, if you don't work at a major label, if you aren't a major label artist, you don't have that usually level of granularity, but you do have platforms like Spotify for Artists, YouTube Analytics, Chartmetric, for example, and other ways to see aggregations of data of yourself, and then also potentially be able to benchmark against other artists as well. Just because you don't have billions of rows of data doesn't mean you can't do a lot when it comes to insights. If in an ideal world, if you're an artist, for example, you should be maintaining as much as you can about your audience. And what I mean by that is you should have access to your merchandise sales. Ideally, if you have access to your ticketing sales or fan club sales, things like that, if you have a Patreon or things like that, you should be aggregating all that together. Those are all just data points. And then you can tell from those data points, cool, who are these different groups? Who are the people that always go to the concerts? Who are the people that always buy merch? Who are the people that do all of the things? Who are the people that are always DMing me or always sharing or always whatever? You can still build out these audiences. Just because you don't have a billion rows of data doesn't mean you don't have really insightful information into who your audience is. And then you could also just ask them. I think it's a lost art, especially if you're a smaller artist. You can just say, hey, what else are you guys listening to? Hey, what kind of merch do you want? Hey, where should I tour? Whatever it might be. You can just talk to your audience. I think sometimes it's lost on people that's a two-sided relationship.
Yeah.
And that's all also data points. Qualitative data is just as important as quantitative data.
Yeah. How important is that dialogue for what you do?
I mean, so it depends, right? So for what I do, when I was a label, I had a lot more access to data, so I didn't necessarily need to have as much of the dialogue. But I did look at qualitative information quite often, but I had to look at it at scale. And what I mean by that is this is going to get a little nerdy for a second, but qualitative data was still really important. So quantitative data will be things like number of streams, number of playlist placements, things along those lines. Qualitative data might be more so what are the names of the playlists that the artists are being put on, for example, or it might be a big example of some work that I did was around natural language processing, meaning I was taking all of the comments people are saying about our artists on YouTube and distilling those down into themes and motifs about how people are perceiving the artist as a whole. So when we're thinking about, like I said, the positioning of the artist, what perception people have of the artist, I would use the comments that people are leaving as a way to map and understand the perception people have of the artist.
Yeah.
And so if we were working on a project where we wanted to shift the perception of the artist from, let's say, a pop star to an indie star or whatever it might be, whatever way we wanted to move the artist, I would look at how those comments change over time to say, hey, we gotten from this point to the other. So I didn't have to physically ask I didn't have to go and ask the fans, hey, how are you feeling about this? I was able to use the information they were already giving back to me, essentially. Yeah. But in the same way, it's just I acquired qualitative data, and as an artist or as a smaller manager, whatever it might be, you can acquire qualitative data however way you need it. Mm-hmm. I think if you start off with what is the problem, what is the question, then you just figure out what the answer is. How do I find that answer is that in-between bit that I do as a data scientist, but that's all you're trying to do at all times is I have a problem, I have a question, how do I solve that, basically?
Yeah. That's really insightful. I've never thought about utilizing the comments to really understand, how to frame the way that an artist is perceived. I never looked at that as a piece of data that I could use in that way. So it's really interesting that you use it in that way.
Thank you. It's fun.
I love you, Christine. So, in an industry where people often focus on art and creativity, you've built your niche through data and insights. How do you strike the balance between art and analytics? And how do you convince others that numbers can have a soul?
Yes. It's funny because after all these years, the music industry is still an industry of cool, right?
Yeah.
That has not changed.
Yeah, I don't think it will ever change.
It will never change. And on my good days, I like to say, thankfully, I'm cool. Meaning I know how to talk to artists still.
Yeah.
Despite having way too many degrees for someone that works in music, I know how to have a conversation with artists. In the 20 years I have worked in music at this point, I do not think I've ever shown an artist a graph. I don't think I have ever opened up an Excel sheet to show them anything. When I talk with artists, I'm like, cool, let me tell you about your audience. Let me tell you how they're different in different territories. It's mood boards, it's vibes, it's energy. It's what they understand. It's the art bit. This is who this is as a holistic person. It's in the back of it. It took me a lot of number crunching and a lot of queries and a lot of coding to get to that point. But the end result for them is vision. It's art. It's something that resonates with them, basically. And that's something that's really important to me. And so when I'm having the conversations, like at the end of the day, it's just understand your audience, read the room. And I think that's inherently how the music industry works, right? Like, act like you've been somewhere before. It's one of my favorite sayings in the music industry because it's so pertinent to so many different components of it. Be it the first time you're interacting with the artist to like when you're trying to present your work or whatever you're doing, read the room, right? The way I present to an artist is not the same way I would present to a fellow data scientist. It's not the same way I present to an industry exec, right? All of those are different people. They get told things differently. Even if it's the same underlying answer, right?
Yeah.
They're just going to be presented to it differently. So I spent a lot of my life balancing out that, right? Making sure that like we're not getting too into the weeds because like sometimes people don't care, like making sure that you give them what they want rather than like what you want to say. And I would say on the flip side, part of the reason why I became a data scientist and I went through the trouble of getting a degree is because I am a Black woman working in the music industry. And let me tell you, a lot of times people don't want to listen to Black women, but people love numbers. People will listen to me and my charts and my graphs and my code, even if they're not going to listen to me because I'm a Black woman. And so it always helps be able to pull that out of my pocket and say, no, I can just query the data myself for you if you would like. And so it kind of works to my advantage on that side of things. Also, while being able to have those conversations with artists.
Yeah. Being a Black woman in tech and data within the music industry is still very, very rare. What does it mean to you to occupy that space? And have you faced specific challenges and barriers because of your race and your gender? And how have you overcome them?
Yeah, I always joke that I'm a woman of many intersections.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just, especially in music, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
I am a Black woman with a tech background and an immigrant, all at the same time, essentially. So there's a lot going on there. And I would say it's a constant battle. Yeah. It's never been an easy one. I don't feel like I've ever taken the quote traditional path, obviously.
Yeah.
So it's never been easy, and it's never been easy for me to do what I want to do or be where I want to be or avoid being kind of like put into a singular box, basically. So I spent a lot of my career basically trying to explain who I am, what I do, why it's important, and why it's more broad and more vast than how people perceive it, basically. And so oftentimes because I happen to know how to code, people come to me and they're like, oh, do you want to be on our tech team? I'm like, no. And they're like, do you want to be on our marketing team? I'm like, not really. They're like, what do you want to do? I'm like, I want to do both of those things. I want to combine those things.
Yeah.
And the music industry is often not an industry that understands that.
Yeah.
It's also not an industry that understands transferable skills well. It's not an industry that lets you move between roles really easily. And as someone that considers themselves basically a generalist, it's a really tough industry to be in because it's often an industry that expects you to be a specialist in something. I am a specialist in something. I'm a specialist in several things. And that has always made it really challenging. And then on top of that, if you think about the quote unquote traditional music industry, and so what I'm talking about there would be like the major label system, for example, you run into issues where there's only a few paths to the top, basically. If you don't have an A&R background, good luck. Like if you happen to have a marketing background, perhaps they'll acquiesce, basically. But there's people that look like me certainly aren't at the top. People that look like me, they don't have my background. They have a tech background. And despite the music industry making almost all of its money from technology at this point, given that it's all streaming, it's always been really strange to me how unembraced tech is as a value add as a music executive, basically. I find it often gets pushed to the side, being like, oh, those people don't aren't artist facing. Those people don't do the real work. Those people are just giving the reports to the people that are doing the real work, essentially. And so I've always had to push back against that because I'm multifaceted, right? And so even if you look at my resume right now, I can code in multiple languages, and it's at the very bottom of my resume. And the reason why it's at the very bottom is because if I have it at the top, everyone's going to want to give me a tech job that I don't want, essentially. And having to do that feels really silly, because it should be a value add, but I often find it that's the other way around, essentially.
How does it feel to not fit in a box and have everybody want to put you in a box? Because I often face this myself with someone recently. I was having a meeting with them. They went, "Oh, I didn't realize that you did this, and you had an understanding of, finance and investment and A&R and marketing and all these different areas." And they were like, "You're a bit of a polymath." I was like, "Yeah." Like, but within the industry, you get put in a box. Oh, you're the guy that does, for me, you're the guy that talks about black stuff. You do power. You know what I mean? Or you're the guy that does this, or you're the guy you're the guy that does independence. How do you navigate staying out of that box that they want to put you in?
I just jump out of the box a lot, basically.
Hi.
Exactly. I'm just like, yeah, I mean, like very similar where I have to, like I'm constantly explaining myself, right? Every time I introduce myself, I feel like it's a paragraph long. So I usually have to like succinct it down to something manageable when I'm having a conversation. But really, I just kind of refuse to go in the box. I take on, if you look at my resume, there's lots of different roles, lots of different backgrounds, different parts of the industry. I'm constantly kind of moving and evolving, and that's on purpose because I remember when I left major label, and I remember someone said to me, they're like, "Oh, I can't believe you're leaving major label." It was after like 5+ years, right? They're like, "Oh, I can't believe you're leaving major label. I just always associated you so much with major label." I was like, "Oh, absolutely not." No one's ever going to say that sentence again. Is what I remember thinking in that exact moment while I was having that conversation, because I am nobody's, like, that's not who I am. I am Christine. And like, if you want to have Christine at your company, that's great. But I at no point am going to be your company is not going to represent me, basically. And that was always really important for me. And then in addition to that, like you said, the box, it's unlikely at this point in my career I'm going to take on a role that is purely in a singular lane. Like I'm probably never going to have a purely marketing role again, or a purely data role again, or anything along those lines, because that's not what I want. That's not who I am. And so I'm often willing to not take the big sounding title or nice paying job or whatever it might be if it feels like it's going to put me in a box. I know I could make a whole lot of money being SVP of data at a mid-level indie company. I can do that, but that's not what I want, right? And so it's being willing to bet on yourself a lot more, instead of going with here's a path that is very clearly outlined for me. If I did just go down a clear marketing path, there is a very clear path for. You start off as a director of marketing, you move your way up to blah 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 blah. There's that path is there. I can see it. I understand the vision of that path. But it's not the path I want. So what am I hanging around for, basically? And so I discovered that, especially in the last few years, where I'm like, if there's not a path for me there, why am I hanging around? And so I've just kind of consistently and continuously just kind of made the path I needed for the time instead, because there's no other way. Because the box, even if you try to put me in a box, I'm not staying. It doesn't matter. So
that in itself is a brave thing, right? First of all, I always say to people, don't let the company define who you are. Define yourself. You know, someone said to me once, you're Ben from such and such. I said, no, I've got Unstoppable tattooed on my body. If you're going to say Ben from anywhere, it's Ben from Unstoppable. My brand, my thing, what I do.
Yep.
Right? So first of all, that's really brave that you're able to do that. But when you want to step out of a role, how do you go about doing that? Because, you know, a lot of people are like, I don't want to be here anymore. I'm done with this job. I'm done with this role. I need to start looking for something else. But they still need to earn the money to pay the mortgage or do the car payments or, you know, put food on the table, keep the kids in school, whatever it is. What do you do that gives you the confidence to say, I'm done, I'm moving on to the next one? And how do you go about finding the next one?
Yeah. There's a lot of different layers there. So I moved to Europe 7 years ago at this point, right? And one thing that's uniquely European in comparison to America is contracts, right? Yeah. And so with the contracts, you quit a job or they fire you, they have to give you several months notice, basically. Yeah. And so I remember when I got here and someone was like, they were like concerned. They're like, oh, you know, they might be doing layoffs soon. You know, they might fire me. I'm like, but if they fire you, they have to pay you for 3 months. That's the best case scenario. And as an American, it's been 7 years now.
Like a true American.
I've never gotten over this. I was like, I'm like, I could do anything in 3 months. What? I can find 3 new jobs in 3 months. What do you mean? Wow. Yeah, sorted. It's fine. So I've always had that, like, especially being in Europe, there's always a safeguard of like, at no point, like, you're gonna have to pay me. If you want me to go, you're gonna pay me. So like, that's sorted. And this, on the flip side, if I'm going to quit, I'm gonna be hanging around for 3 months anyway. So I tend to leave jobs before I've gotten something new, because in my head, I'm like, I can get myself a new job in 3 months. We'll sort that out later, basically. And the bravery you're talking about with regards to like, yes, money needs to come in still. I'm incredibly privileged in a lot of different ways. First of all, I have a wonderful husband, and he continues to earn money as I quit jobs consistently. We love that. That's very nice. But also, I'm going to try to say this without alienating a whole lot of people, so I apologize in advance. I don't have responsibilities on purpose, because it allows me the flexibility in my life to be able to do what I want to do. Meaning, all those things you said, I don't have any of them. Yeah. I have no kids. I have no mortgage. I don't have pets. I don't have plants even. I have nothing that is required of me. So if everything went catastrophically wrong, the only thing that needs to be paid is my rent. Basically, we can get real skinny if we need to. Essentially, and that is entirely on purpose. I'm also really good. You know, the MBA comes really in handy because I'm actually very good with my finances. That helps a lot as well. And then when it comes to finding a new job, like you said, I'm Christine. I'm not Christine from anything except for my own brands, basically. And so I have networked and built a network over especially the last like 5 to 7 years, where I know that I can rely on my network if I need something, if I need a new job, if I need a project, a contract, whatever. I know I can go to those people. At this point in my career, I've purposely made it so if there's anyone at any company I want to talk to, I'm fairly certain I can convince them to take my call at this point. I couldn't say that 7 years ago, but that was on purpose to get to this point where I'm comfortable enough to know that if I quit my job, it's not the end of the world, basically.
That's incredible. I think that's a lesson a lot of us can learn. I just want to go back to you being a Black woman in spaces that aren't necessarily associated with Black women. And there's a lot of pressure when you're the only one in the room. I'm often the only one in the room. I know you're often the only one in the room. And there's a pressure to represent our whole community when we're in those spaces. Do you feel a sense of responsibility to advocate for change when you're in those spaces? And if so, how do you balance that with your own personal and professional goals?
Yeah. It's one of my life goals is to make it so that Black women can be mediocre at their jobs, because a whole lot of other people get to be very mediocre at their jobs with no consequences. I
really want to high five you with that one.
I don't get me
high five, Christine. Right. You speaking truth.
Don't get me wrong. I love Black excellence. Black excellence is great. We strive for that all day, every day. But let me tell you, there's a reason why that phrase does not exist with any other race.
Yes.
Because they don't need to be blank excellence at all times. They can be purely mediocre at their jobs and continue to succeed, and sometimes even fail upwards. Let me tell you, I've never seen a Black woman fail upwards. And so I think about this a whole lot, where I would love it. I would absolutely love it if I was not the only person of color in the room, the only woman in the room. I would love that. That's an ideal situation to be. And I'm willing to have that fight, but only for so long.
Yeah.
There's a quote that I really love is stop trying to sit at tables you're meant to flip. And I think about this all the time because I'm like, oh, if I walk into a room and I realize that we're not getting there, I'm like, there's no point in me continuing to have this fight. We're not going to get to where we need to be. I will go around you. We will figure out another way. There is always another path forward. No matter what you're trying to accomplish in the music industry, even if it feels so bleak, I think sometimes people are so focused on like there's like, oh, there's the perfect job or the perfect this, the perfect that I need to get. There is not. If you think about this from the basic level, there are 3 major labels. If one doesn't want you, go to the other 2. Like, there's so many different routes forward. There's so many different paths forward. And so for me, as a Black woman, I'm like, if you don't see my value, if you don't see the value of us, if you don't see the value of diversity, whatever it might be, why? I am not playing with you anymore. I'm going to take my ball and go elsewhere, and we'll figure that thing out somewhere else, basically. And so a lot of the work that I do is education, certainly, and working towards diversity, working towards inclusion, but I'm only willing to have a fight for so long. It's clear where people's values lie. And if they don't align with my values, I will work with them if I need to. I will take what I need to take from them, but I'm not going to have that fight continuously because it's not worth my time or effort, basically.
Yeah. No, I totally understand that. I was having a conversation about Power Up, which we'll get into in a minute, and someone was talking to me about, when we set that up, and they're like, Ben, you're a table flipper. And you've just alluded to the same thing. So yeah, it's really interesting that you say that. Speaking of Power Up, you were a year 1 participant on the Power Up initiative. I've spoken about this in previous podcasts, but for those that are just joining us on this one for the first time, Power Up focuses on supporting Black music creators and professionals to break through the glass ceilings and move into spaces that aren't often occupied by us. How did that experience shape or change the way you think about your role in the industry? And what kind of legacy do you hope to leave for others coming through that program?
Yeah, being a year 1 participant was exciting because we were the guinea pigs. We didn't know what we were getting into. It was also like deep COVID, like deep me at my kitchen table COVID, like deep COVID. I think I was like September 2020 or something like that. It was properly, we were in it. And so we didn't know what to expect, right? We didn't know what was going to come of it. And it was a really exciting time. And it's been amazing to watch where we are now. Like watching like the people that were in my cohort like absolutely crushing it has been amazing to watch. And so like, I didn't know what I was getting into. I remember when I applied, I was like, are they gonna give this little Black girl from America that works at a major label? Like why would they, I'm like, they're gonna throw this application out. Why would why would they talk to me? And so I was thrilled when I actually obviously got accepted. And what I got accepted for was for my conference. I run a conference called Measure of Music. It's a music tech and data conference and hackathon. And I had done it 1 year. I was like, I'm going to do this again, but I need money, basically. And so part of the reason why I applied was for that purpose, right? And it became just so much bigger than that. I got so many opportunities. I remember I went to the Music Week Awards for the first time because of Power Up. I was in the same room as Leo Cohen for the first time because of Power Up. Like there was all these things that were just constantly happening to me. And it felt like my network accelerated and grew so rapidly that I didn't even I don't think I even fully clocked what was happening until after it happened. Now like I said, I can email someone from any company, they'll take my email. Part of that's from Power Up. Like there's I know that if I need to pitch something over to the press, I know exactly who to email in the press. I didn't know that 5 years ago. There's all these different pieces that came together where that shaped who I am and my role as an exec. And I had so much confidence to continue to move and continue to grow and continue to move up in my role or in the roles I was seeking because of Power Up, basically. And then I've watched the same thing happen with so many of the others in my cohort, which has been amazing to watch. Like watching people become head of diversity and inclusion at UK Music, head of music at South by Southwest London, amazing stuff that everyone is doing. I don't think any of us, we were all really ambitious people, but I don't know if we all saw where we would be now, even watching the artists and where they've gotten to and the gigs they're playing and where they are. I don't think we all thought that's where we'd be, but it's incredible to have I would say at the start, it was incredible to have 40 people that cared nothing but good for you. They only want to see good things happening for you. I prior to Power Up, I don't think I can count 40 people in the music industry that wanted anything good to happen for me.
Well, now there's 160.
Exactly. Now we have 160.
We've got so many
right?
years that have gone on. So
who would have thought,
you know.
right? I mean, we had an event a couple weeks ago, and I'm like, it never gets old being in a room full of Black people. Just a whole room full of Black people is incredible.
Yeah.
Just that alone is amazing. Let alone everything else that comes from that, you know. And so with regards to legacy, it's this idea of community and support. I feel incredibly indebted and grateful to Power Up, to PRS Foundation, to everyone that's been involved with it. And all I want to do is give back. Like, you know, a rising tide lifts all ships, right? Like, if 160 of us are doing good, we're all doing good. We're all going to eat, right? And so as long as we can make that happen, that's like the only legacy I want to keep. It's just like, we should all be good. And if I'm good, you're good, we're all good. We should be helping each other out. And that's what we're all trying to do. And like 4 years in at this point, that's all we're still trying to do, right?
Yeah. It's for me, it's just, it's weird. It's like you have this vision of something, you execute, and you hope that it's going to manifest in the way that you see it in your head. But you kind of feel like it's not going to. And then to see it actually do that, but not only do that, but surpass the expectations that I even had for it is incredible. And, you know, people like you that just go out and advocate for it and really speak to the power of the good that it's done in your career, it just means loads.
Oh, well, you did an amazing job. Like, I remember when I saw this and I remember seeing it said 10 years. I was like, there's no way. I was like, there's no way. That's not
Believe
real.
me, every year's a battle. It's like, can we do this again? We can't do this again. How are we going to do this again? We got to raise
But
capital.
We're doing it, right?
Yeah, we make it happen.
It's amazing. You've done an incredible job. It's incredible.
Yeah, myself and the team. Shouts to Joe Yao and everybody else. So, yeah. I want to talk to you about imposter syndrome. I know we had a little chat about this before the cameras were rolling, and you know, you said something super impactful. But imposter syndrome, it's something that comes up for so many leaders. I've experienced it. I still experience it sometimes walking into rooms. You've built this incredible career. Have there been moments that you've doubted yourself? And how did you navigate those feelings, and what kept you grounded?
So, as you all might recall at this point, I am American. And one thing Americans are known to have is undue confidence. It's one of our defining qualities, is my understanding of it. And so, like, to be completely frank, no, I've never felt imposter syndrome. I've never felt like I didn't belong in the space that I was in, basically. I mean, it might just be like blind ignorance or like a complete lack of humility. Right. But sometimes, like, the thing about it is, like, in the same way, I think the music industry is still an industry of cool. It's still an industry of confidence, right? Like, you walk in and you have to, you have to act like you've been somewhere before, even if you haven't been there before, right? And so a big component for me is that I've always been like, no, I belong here. Why do I belong here? All these other people belong here. That person's just so-and-so's cousin. Like, why do I belong here? You know, like, and so I always walk into the roles I'm in, and I always say, you know, I always present like I belong where I'm supposed to be, where I currently am. I belong in that room because I'm in that room, basically. And so on top of that, it's because my whole life, right, I was always fighting to get there. It's not like it was a bunch of like easy things didn't always happen to me. You know, it wasn't like, oh, someone just handed me this thing. So I definitely understand why someone might feel imposter syndrome if it feels like, oh, you know, I just kind of fell into this, or I lucked into this. I have never lucked or fell into anything in my entire life. And if anyone would like to luck or fall me into something, please give me a call. But so far, that's not really how my career has gone or my life has gone. It takes a lot of work and effort. And so by the time I've done all of the work and the climbing up, the trying to climb up the ladder and break the ceilings and all these other things, of course I belong there. I belonged there 5 years ago.
I hear you. I think for some people, like for myself, the moments I've had imposter syndrome, I think the biggest one was around finance. And I walked into this space of investment and I was like, talk to me about anything in the music industry. You can't talk to me. I don't care who you are. Like the biggest, most successful person, we can go. Let's have it. But that was a space where I was like, oh, I don't know. Not that I don't belong here, but I don't feel like I have the knowledge to really challenge in the same way that I would. And you get that feeling of, oh, should I? And especially when you're the only person that looks like you in that room, right? Because you have that weight of, I'm not just representing me here. If people think I'm not up to it, that's going to represent everybody that looks like me. And that's a big weight to carry. And you said something to me before about imposter syndrome not existing.
Yeah.
And I'd love you to
I can
talk
explain.
about that.
Yeah. I mean, and so when I hear that, I hear that, I feel that, I understand that. But in my head, I'm like, yeah, you're probably the only one who looked like you in that room, right? And I think about this a lot. And what I say, and it might be a bit cynical, but what I truly believe is when it comes to roles and opportunities and access and things like that, oftentimes if they have brought a woman or a person of color in that room, it is because they had no choice. You had to have been the best option, because if there was some mediocre white man, they would have given that job to him instead. I promise you. And so I don't believe imposter syndrome is real. I understand people feel it, but in my experience, people have never gone out of their way to give women or people of color jobs out of the goodness of their hearts. That never happens. No one's ever handing me things like, hey, here you go. We wanted to just give this to you just because you're great. That doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
And no one's doing this out of the kindness of the heart. So by the time they've gotten to the point of offering you the job, inviting you to the bank, inviting you to do this or whatever it might be, it is because they had no other choice. You were far and above the best person for the role. In fact, you were likely overqualified for that role, and you should probably ask for a raise for whatever you're doing, because you were probably by far head and shoulders above whoever else they were bringing in. Otherwise, they wouldn't have given you the job, because people hire who they know, people hire who they're comfortable with, people bring in who they're comfortable with. And so if they were so willing to go out of their comfort space to bring you in, is because you were overqualified for that role at that point. And so that's why I never have imposter syndrome, is because I'm like, oh no, I am so wildly qualified for this role that you're trying to give me right now that of course I should have this job.
Yeah. And the other way I flip it on its head is I always go, well, I'm the only person in the room that looks like me, so I'm bringing a superpower that you have no idea what it is. Or, it's like I'm Spider-Man. I can climb the walls. You can't.
Yeah, and I would say I totally agree with that. Whether or not they agree with that is a whole other question.
But it doesn't matter.
Right.
As long as I believe.
Right, exactly. Right. I agree. Exactly that.
I want to talk about LinkedIn. Your LinkedIn powerhouse. Your LinkedIn... I've never seen so many people. What's the number at the moment? It's about
I think we're going to get to 34,000. I think just under 34,000 followers.
34,000 followers on LinkedIn. And you don't usually think of LinkedIn as a platform for social media in the same way that you look at Instagram or TikTok or Twitter, X, may it rest in peace. Such like, right? What do you think people are getting wrong when it comes to building their personal brands on platforms like LinkedIn? And how do you personally master the art of standing out in such a crowded space?
I did never intended to have 34,000 followers on LinkedIn, I swear. It happened over the last I guess 5 years or so, during COVID especially. And I guess what people resonate with me, or what they say they resonate with me, is that I tend to just talk on LinkedIn like I talk in real life. I think sometimes people get on LinkedIn and they become some weird corporate version of themselves, where they're like, I am pleased and humbled to announce that. I'm like, chill. It's not that serious. I need you to calm down, right? Just talk like a normal person. And so the way I speak on LinkedIn is the way I speak in general. I remember making a little cheeky post because someone posted a conference image. As part of this, I was being a speaker on for this conference, and it was meet the the industry thought leaders, blah blah blah. And I think I reposted. I was like, allegedly, I am an industry thought leader. And you should come check me out in LA.
Well, it's in your bio. I did read the bio before the interview. Thought leader was in there.
I would never post on LinkedIn and say I was a thought. It's just not who I am as a person. And so I think you just have to be yourself. And I think some people get so in their heads when they go on LinkedIn that they have to be like the suit and tie, most professional person. We work in music. You can calm down. It's all right. It's not that serious, And so I think that's a big part of it, that I bring my own personal brand to LinkedIn of just myself. I don't think I've crafted any I'm just myself on LinkedIn, basically. And that's really helped me a lot over the years, which has been wonderful. And I do a lot to just give back to other people. So I post a roundup of jobs that I see on LinkedIn every few weeks. I do a lot of just more of a FAQ posts about the music industry. I host live sessions, things along those lines. And then my conference, I do a lot of work with my conference through LinkedIn as well. So I'm usually doing a lot of different things and making a lot of content on LinkedIn, just talking about the industry. And I think I'm pretty transparent and open, especially because I'm not beholden to anybody, which is lovely. And so
Yeah.
I can just say what I want to say, which
Yeah.
I think people find refreshing and for better or worse for myself sometimes, but it is what it is. But I just say what I want to say. And then with regards to like how people can use it better, besides be yourself, is that you should treat it like those social media platforms. I actually don't have an Instagram.
I was
But
gonna say that.
yeah.
I noticed you don't engage on
Yeah.
Instagram and some of the other platforms, but you're very focused in on LinkedIn. Is that
Yeah,
strategic?
it is. And this is something, like I said, I know I recognize the music industry as an industry of cool. And everyone follows each other on Instagram, but I had a desire for my coworkers to see me in a bikini at any point in time. Like I don't, my brain can't register. Like I just don't have that in me. Like I don't want that. Like I
Yeah.
don't want you to know my life. Like there's work and there's not work. I have friends that are industry friends, but there's work and there's not work, right?
Yes.
And there's
Yes.
something about Instagram feels so inherently like not work that has become very much work that I don't love.
Yeah.
And so LinkedIn is a platform that I feel much more comfortable sharing and being open on, basically. And so I think if you're going to open up, Twitter, or open up TikTok, or open up Instagram and scroll, your 30 minutes, hour scrolling there, just open up LinkedIn and do the same thing, comment, post, like, et cetera, just like you would any other platform.
Yeah.
And you just get more comfortable with it, basically.
During your journey, I want to talk. I want to go back a little bit and touch on your traveling, because you mentioned, you've lived in Sweden, you've lived in the UK, you do a lot of traveling. You're always like, you've literally got off a plane 12 hours ago to come do this interview. Having that ability to move across different countries and industries, which is something a lot of people dream about, but they're often afraid to do. What advice would you give someone who feels stuck or scared to take that step moving forward?
Yeah. I mean, you just do it. I mean, I wish I had like some like deep, profound advice, but I remember when I moved to Stockholm, everyone was like, "Oh God, you're so brave to move to Stockholm." And I'm like, I'm moving from a city to a city. First of all, it's like if I was moving to like the middle of nowhere, like if I was moving up to like the Midlands, that'd probably be a lot more jarring than me moving to Stockholm. It's not that serious, you know. But also like, you can just go back. Like, no one took away my passport when I left America. If I didn't like it, I could have just gone home. Like, and I think a lot of people move with a sense of, people make a lot of decisions with fear attached to it, right?
Yeah.
Or lack of decision making because of fear attached to it, or shame or embarrassment, and it's like, oh, but if I go and I don't like it, I come back, did I,
Did I fail?
Yeah, I failed. And I was like, but you failed to who? All those people that stayed there and didn't do nothing? Who are you trying to impress? Though he's a bit toxic now, I would say one of my favorite quotes is from Drake, where he says, if I was doing this for you, then I have nothing left to prove. Like, this isn't for them. Who cares what they think? This is for me. And so when I make my decisions, it's for me. And so I moved to Stockholm because I wanted to move to Stockholm. After 2 years, I didn't love it. So I moved. No one's stopping you. And so even when I was leaving Stockholm, I remember, some friends were like, oh man, I wish I could move to London. This was pre-Brexit. I was like, you literally can. You can you can just go. I had to go get a visa. You can just pack up your stuff and pop on over. It's like an hour and a half flight.
Yeah.
And so there's all like, if there's no barriers in your way, just do the thing that you want to do, basically. And so I think more people should just get into this mindset of you can just do whatever you want. I say that all the time in life. You can just do whatever you want. People will try to tell you you can't. People will try to tell you, oh, you have to do this and you have to do that. You have to do that. You can just not do those things. And just make the call, make the decision. And also, if you are still scared and don't want to do it, make some friends. Moving to London was a lot easier because one of the things I did when I was working at Universal is I talk to everybody. I think people underestimate how much power it is to work at these big companies. It's cool to work at big companies for like lots of reasons, but my favorite thing was that like I would pop over to, Belgium, or I'd pop over to, another territory and be like, hey, can I come to the office? And they're like, sure. And I have friends in Denmark. I have friends in Belgium. I had tons of friends in the UK before I got here, all because of leveraging my network internally at work. And so I didn't like coming to London. I had friends immediately, and it made it a lot easier to move to London. But even if you don't have the friends, you can still do it. But if you want to do something, you got to do it. You got to put the effort in, and whatever you're scared of, just figure out how to overcome the thing that's making you uncomfortable, the thing that's making you scared, and then you can just do the thing you want to do.
And someone that's a little bit more introvert, because you have a big personality.
True.
I love talking to you because I feel energized every time I talk to you. You got so much energy. But for someone that's a bit more introverted, that might not have the same level of confidence, say, I'm going to Belgium, let me hit up so-and-so at the office. How do they overcome that? How do they just get up and go and just do it?
I've obviously never been an introvert. So
Oh,
my
no,
brain,
'cause I've never
I'm
been
like,
that.
I don't know how you do it. I mean, the thing about it is, like, at the end of the day, those are still the people. Like, let's say you work at a bigger company, for example. Those are still the people you work with on a day-to-day
Yeah.
basis, right? And so it shouldn't be out of the realm of possibilities for you to just be like, oh, hey, by the way, I'm just going to be here on these days. Can we get lunch, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a whole thing. You don't have to make it like a big thing. It can be very simple.
not a date.
Like, right? You're like, hey, let's get lunch or whatever. Or
Yeah.
can I just come to the office and get a coffee? And so it might be a big ask. It may feel like a really big, heavy ask, but if you start with people that you're comfortable with, that you know well, that you've already worked with in the past, no one I've ever been a coworker with has ever said no to me saying, hey, can I come by the Germany office or whatever? That's never happened.
Yeah.
And so I don't anticipate a world where that would happen if you're literally working there. But even so, I think like one of the things I've done years of therapy. I believe therapy is great. I remember when my therapist would say to me, what's the worst that could happen? And even if you are scared, what's that? One of my favorite sayings is, I want to do something, but I'm scared. And then someone says, then do it scared. Like,
love that.
Right? Then do it scared, right?
Yeah.
If you're scared, just what worst case is going to happen is like, do you think they're going to point and laugh at you? They're probably not, Just do the thing, right? I don't have any, I wish I had some like groundbreaking advice for introverts, but it's still got to just do it scared.
Yeah. I remember reading something that said the biggest barrier is often yourself and the voice that's in your head.
Yep.
And you have to overcome that voice in order to go and succeed in the things that you want to achieve.
Yep, constantly.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, just because I am a massive extrovert with, again, undue confidence, it doesn't mean it doesn't mean I don't have those voices in my head as well. There's still the thought process of what if I fail? What if it doesn't work? All those things are still there, but I think you have to think of the inverse a lot more than people do, right? What if I fail? It's like, what if you succeed?
Yeah.
Right? What
absolutely.
what if it goes amazing, right? And like having that thing that's the driving force in my head as well is like, despite all the anxieties that I have, is like, but what if it's amazing?
Yeah.
And if you think about that with every decision you're making in life, then the best case scenario could also happen, not just the worst case, right?
Speaking of failure, pollen. You're at the ill-fated company,
Yes.
Pollen. Are you able to speak a little bit on what the company was and how everything went so very wrong? Because from the outside, it looked like the Fire Festival of the music industry. What was really going on there?
Yeah, so Pollen was a startup based here in the UK, and it was live music experiences, basically. So we worked with artists like J Balvin, Justin Bieber, to put on these like multi-day festivals that were centered around the artists, that were fan-focused, that had everything from like the concerts to like brunches and boat parties and all kinds of things that were themed to the actual experiences. A lot of them actually happened. We spent I worked there for just under a year, but there was years of events that took place. And then COVID happened. I worked there after COVID was towards the tail end, but high costs, a lot of things can go very wrong. I went to the company because I love the concept.
Yeah.
And I would say, thinking of everything we talked about so far, is I like to take calculated risks, right? And I remember I got 2 job offers, one from Poland, one from a different company, much more traditional, straightforward role in the industry, like the role that seemed like the obvious next role for me even, right? And I turned that role down to go to Poland because I was like, when I make a decision about where I'm going to work in my career, I think, will this opportunity present itself again to me? And I knew that the opportunity to work at this company was not going to present itself again for various reasons. One ended up being because it went out of business. Startups have really sweet spots. There's special times to work at a startup, and if you catch it at that time, imagine being employee 50 at Spotify. Imagine being employee 10 at SoundCloud, whatever it might be, right? Like there's a special time in which you want to, like, if that opportunity presents itself, you just take it, right? And so that's what I did with going with Pollen. I love the concept. I still love the concept. I think it's an excellent one.
Great concept.
It just was executed poorly, with a lot of money being spent irresponsibly. And so that's what went wrong. They hired incredibly smart people. The people that I were working with were had incredible backgrounds from all over the industry, outside of the industry, etc. And they were doing really great work as well. It's just the money was managed badly, and the combination of the money being managed badly, plus less VC money coming in at the time, plus all of the costs were rising when it came to live touring and things like that because of post-COVID world. It was just the perfect storm to make things completely fall apart. Plus, just like poorly managed. The senior leadership was managing things quite poorly. Everyone else was working very, very hard. So I would never fault any of my, I would say my coworkers, but the senior team, not great. And so the combination of all those things made it go under, but I still very much believe in the concept and the idea. And like, I don't regret going there in any way.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I left major label and went to what basically was being funded like a tech company.
Yeah.
I made almost double my salary from going from one job to another.
Yeah.
And I've been able to maintain that salary for all jobs I've gotten subsequently. And if I had taken the job that was my traditional path and the traditional role, I think that was like a 5% bump, maybe a 10% bump from where I was, as opposed to going over to a different part of the industry. And so there was a lot of upside there. I learned a lot. I got to flex my strategy skills. I got to use my MBA for the first time, basically in music properly. And so I learned and did a lot. And I don't regret going there, despite it falling apart at the end, basically.
That's good. I think that's really interesting that it helped you to grow, even though it didn't necessarily work out in the way that you wanted it to work out.
I mean, most things in life help you to grow, even if it doesn't work out the way you expect it to work out, right? Like you learn constantly. You learn what you like. You learn what you don't like. You learn all kinds of things, no matter how things go at the end, right?
I always say success is failure turned inside out.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, okay, Measure of Music. A lot of your work has been dedicated to making the intersection of data and music more accessible. What was the core problem you were trying to solve when you created Measure of Music? And can you tell our listeners what Measure of Music is and where you hope to see it evolve over the next few years?
Yeah, so Measure of Music is a music tech and data conference and hackathon. It's virtual. It happens every year in the last weekend in February, basically. And it's been going now. This coming February will be year 5. Wow. Yeah.
This time go.
Right? Oh my God. And so the problem I was looking to solve, Measure of Music started in 2020. What happened was a bunch of people got laid off. If you heard there was a global pandemic, a bunch of people lost their jobs. It was kind of bleak, right? And at the time, the only safe place to actually be at the time was basically major labels. We were actually making more money because everyone was at home streaming, basically. So at the time when I was at, for example, I was at Warner at the time. I believe, if I recall, at least Warner UK, there was no layoffs at all that were a result of COVID, basically. And so a lot of people started reaching out to me. They're like, hey, Christine, I lost my job. Can you help? And I'm like, I'll see what I can do, basically. And so they would come to me and they would reach out and they say, I lost my job. They're like, oh, Christine, I think I want to get into music. I want to get into tech. I want to get into data. I'm a Black woman in the space, et cetera, et cetera. And what I started doing, I was having weekly calls, one-on-one calls, 2 a week, basically, with people. What I found was my calendar was full every 6 weeks in advance all the time. And I was like, well, this isn't scalable. So what can I do that's actually scalable? I actually still do Monday night calls. I do group calls now, but I wanted to do something that felt more impactful, more scalable. And so I came up with the concept of Measure of Music. The idea was I was always talking about the same companies, the same idea, the same concepts constantly with each person that reached out, basically. And so I was like, cool, they can just hear from the companies themselves. No point in me talking about Spotify's API or Chartmetric or whatever it might be when I can just ask Spotify and Chartmetric talk about them. And so I was like, cool, let's bring all of my friends together and have them talk about their platforms, their tools, their tech, whatever it might be. And the other component of it was the hackathon. And that was actually the core focus was the hackathon bit, because I said people needed to just do the work, right? They needed to put together a project, need something for their portfolio, because oftentimes in the music industry, even if you work on really cool projects, you actually can't share them. I have plenty of projects I've worked on at labels I really can't share, basically. And so I can't share the gritty details of it. I'm just not allowed for contract purposes, right? And so the idea was to have this project that people could put together for the hackathon that they would have something to put in their portfolio, basically. And so I came up with the idea and I was like, hey, would anybody be interested in this? And I opened up a Google form. And I was like, cool, I think maybe 50 people will be interested. That'd be good, right? I think all 50 spots would fill up in 24 hours.
Oh, wow.
I was like, oh, God, okay, this is a real thing. And then a bunch of people were like, hey, I don't want to participate in the hackathon, but can I watch the talks? And I was like, oh, I suppose.
Can you explain what a hackathon is?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people that are tuned in might not know what a hackathon is.
Yeah, so the general concept, so the idea of a hackathon comes from the pure tech world, basically. The idea is you have a small amount of time, usually a few days, maybe a week, something along those lines, sometimes just like a day, to put together some type of project, usually in a group setting. It can be done virtually, it can be done in person, but it's something that's really common in tech. For example, Spotify does them internally, for example, and I believe ideas like, I want to say, it may have been like, I think maybe like Release Radar, for example, and some other things came from like the hackathons they have internally. Google does them a lot. And there's even like paid competitions where people are professional hackathon participants even.
Yeah.
And so when I first started Measure Music, I didn't actually refer to it as a hackathon as much because I didn't want to intimidate people that were like, oh, I don't code, so I can't be part of a hackathon. I think at this point, we're 5 years in, people understand that you don't have to code to be part of it, basically, because all you're doing is putting together a project. Even if you, let's say you wanted to develop a website, but you're not a web developer, but you are a graphic designer, you can just make it look like the website. It doesn't have to, you don't have to click on it. It doesn't have to work in that way, right? And so that's how I tell people, I'm like, every part of the industry, every skill set is important to make it happen, because if you can code, it's great, but if it looks ugly, it doesn't matter, so we need the graphic designer, and then someone has to present the project, so we need the person that public speaks well, and all these different components have to come together to make it work, basically. And so that's how the hackathon works for Measure Music. I call it the project as well. And so the year one, I brought a bunch of people together. I'm like, cool. I think the year one I want to say it was Spotify speak. I believe Chartmetric. Yeah, Chartmetric is sponsored every year. They spoke. Maybe it was like Last.fm was part of it. I basically pulled together all the different APIs. So like all the different like ways you can get data from different platforms together, basically. And a bunch of people were like, hey, I want to watch it. And I was like, okay. Sure, I guess. And so I started having to put together an actual like program. So it ended up being a 3-day weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And still has always been 3 days, basically. And 1,000 people registered.
Wow.
It was free, so like, but 1,000 people registered for something that I thought like
you had to get
was really niche.
You'd anticipated 50 and you got 1,000.
1,000 people. And so we had
Incredible.
like, I think we ended up with like, maybe 50 or plus did the actual hackathon.
Yeah.
And then 1,000 people registered to watch like the hackathon presentations, the different talks, and things along those lines. And so the problem I was looking to solve was just like, hey, music tech and data is really important. It's the cornerstone of the music industry. It's an underrepresented part of the music industry. If you learn this skill set, no matter what part of the industry you want to work in, it's going to come in handy, was like the concept behind it. And people have gotten jobs, like actual real jobs. People have gotten all kinds of opportunities because of Measure Music. I hear often from people now, a hiring manager will say, hey, I saw someone had Measure Music on their resume, so I gave them an interview.
That's insane.
Nothing warms my heart more than hearing that. Like, because in order to, and that's for the people that go to the hackathon, because it is a grueling 72 hours. And so anyone that actually gets through it all, everyone knows like that person really cares. That person has the grit and the tenacity to actually do whatever the job is. And so I so often hear from hiring managers who are like, yeah, if I see Measure Music on the resume, I always give them an interview, regardless, basically. And so it's evolved. It's been 5 years now. Every year, my speakers have been majority, minority, and gender and race. From year 2 on, I pay all of my speakers. I have raised, at this point, $100,000 in total for the event. Wow. And I have Robin Hooded away the money from all of the major companies in the music and given them out to emerging artists, giving them out to speakers from all over the world. Usually we have 90 countries represented in terms of registrations, and usually from speakers, somewhere between 10 to 15 countries represented. So I'm getting to give money to, 2 years ago, I gave, one of my speakers was this woman from Singapore, and she was still in uni, and it was her first time ever doing public speaking, but she was a fantastic journalist, and I wanted her to talk about the Singaporean and like Southeast Asian music scene, for example. I've had speakers from like Ghana and Tanzania, and I'm able to have all these different voices and unique voices. Last year we had speakers from India, and the way the crowd lit up, they were so excited because they were like, we never get to hear from people from India, especially like even people in the UK say, I don't get to hear from people from India even. And so I brought all these voices together and built this like really amazing community of people. And in the last few years, I've just incorporated more stuff. So there's a career fair. I incorporated an artist hackathon last year. And so it's taking the same concept of a hackathon where people are project-based, where they're doing like the project-based ones, people do like marketing plans or websites or apps or like, deep dives into territories. And I've taken that concept and applied it to artists. So instead of doing explorations on data in that way, you're using the artist data. So they're working on marketing plans for the artist, or working on mailing lists and how to develop a campaign around an album cycle and things like that in the same like 48-hour span of time, basically. And then how it's going to evolve. Gosh, I've incorporated in-person locations at this point, so you can participate in the hackathon in different cities now, simultaneously. And I'm looking to do more work directly with artists as well, because I think there's a lot of opportunity. Artists need help. They always need more help than they ever can get.
Yeah.
And so exploring more ways to be able to use incredible talent that want to work with artists, and giving the artists the opportunity to do that is something that I'm really passionate about and moving forward.
I was really impressed by the whole conference last year.
Yeah.
It was the last one
Yeah.
that, it was the first time that I actually really engaged it, and obviously you asked me to speak it as well, so I really got to see it, and it was so impressive. I got to say, it was really, really impressive.
Thank you so much. It's a lot of work, obviously, and I don't think you fully understand what it is until you're in it.
Yeah.
Because it's special, even though it's like, I think for a lot of people, they're like, oh, it's a virtual conference, okay, whatever. But it's actually a really special space to be in for like 72 hours. Everyone's very tuned in. It's very energetic, very interactive. Everyone's speaking up. There's a lot of conversation. It's a really fun 72 hours, basically.
Yeah, for sure. What drives you? You've built a career in all these different spaces. You've supported so many people to build their own careers and elevated them into other spaces. But what drives Christine?
At the end of the day, my overall life thesis is I just want to help people, especially artists. That's all I care about, really. A lot of other things, like, there's a lot of other things that get in the way of that, especially in my whole career. There's always the red tape and the bureaucracy and the corporate this and the capitalism this, et cetera, et cetera. And like, all I want to do is help artists.
Yeah.
All I want to do is help people. I want to help artists. And that's what drives me. And if I feel like I have that opportunity, that is what I want to be doing. And I feel like I'm always actively seeking ways to be able to do that. And for example, and it's always a roundabout way, because one thing I hate charging artists for money, right? I hate charging them. So I'm like, cool, how can I help the artist without it cost them anything? So I'm like, cool, I have all these sponsors for my conference. I'm going to give all this money to that artist. And so that's what drives me. And then also I love learning. I've always been incredibly ambitious. But I love being around smart people, and I feel like I am my best when I'm around smart people. And I aim to be in rooms with smart people as frequently as possible.
I think that's a really good nugget that you just gave. Really good nugget. Looking over everything you've accomplished, being a Power Up Year 1 participant, launching Measure of Music, working at labels, traveling around the world, living in different countries, what's one piece of advice that you would give to a young woman of color who's looking to break into an industry where they might not see themselves represented?
Yeah, I always say and it's not even a regret per se, but if people ask me like, what is the one thing you wish you did differently or anything like that in my my career, in my life, and the answer is always, I wish I would have done it sooner. Whatever it was, I wish I would have done it sooner. Like I've never regretted taking the leap, right? I've always wished I did it earlier. I always thought about moving to New York. I never did, right? I always thought about doing all these different things. I think if people look at my career and people look at my life, they're like, oh, Christine's always making these big risks. I was like, I think I played it too safe. I think I could have gone bigger. I think I could have done more, and that is the thing that I would give as advice to anyone that's young and scrappy and hungry. Just do it. Like, I love, there are women that I see right now that like did 2 years label and they started their own companies. I'm like, I love that for you. Like they learned what they needed to learn, they did it, and they're moved on, right? I like, do it. Just do it. Like, the thing about it is, when it comes, especially if you're working in the music industry, is the music industry only cares about what you've done. They don't. I have 3 degrees, and I always tell people you don't need any of them. They don't care. That is not what they care about, right? They care about what you have done. And so if you want to be the next whoever, right, you just got to do the work, right? If you want to be the manager, if you want to be the marketer, if you want to do whatever, you just have to do it. I know you're not going to see anyone else looks like you doing it. I know you're not going to see anyone around that's going to support you or help you when you're starting off, but you have to do it anyway, because who's going to do it, right? And then you can be the role model. You can be the person that people look up to and say, hey, that's the person that looks like me that's doing the work, right? but just do it. There's nothing else. There's no other piece of advice. People come to me all the time. They're like, Christine, they're like, I really want to be an artist manager. And I always say, well, you better go find artists, manage them. There's no other steps.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I can't have you here and not ask you about AI. Okay. It would be remiss of me to have you here and not ask you about AI. What do you think about the threats that AI brings, and what do you think about the opportunities that AI brings? Because there's a very negative light shone on AI, but I'm pretty sure that you have a much broader view. What's your thoughts?
Yeah. Okay, so my thoughts on AI. I have lots of them, as you can imagine, but I have lots of thoughts on lots of things. So I'm a data scientist, and I have been a data scientist now for 10 years, essentially. AI is just one of the things, the string of buzzwords that people are saying about the same thing. Machine learning has existed for quite some time. AI is mostly just machine learning, basically, just to an elevated stance. Back when I was in school, big data was a big term people were using, and we got to machine learning. It's all the same stuff, basically, especially because outside of the very, very complex models, most AI models are really simple, basically. They are regression models primarily, or they're pretty basic neural networks or decision trees or all kinds of other nerdy stuff I can go down, but they're not complex, basically. They're fairly simple when it comes down to math and stats, basically. So getting that out of the way, where I still say AI is just one of the many buzzwords that people are talking about right now. The threats. So obviously there's a big component of AI music, right? And the irony of it is, even when I first started as data scientist, people would always say like, oh, do you know the formula for a perfect song? And I'm like, kind of, right? Like there's certain things that kind of align there where you could probably do that. But let me tell you, having worked with artists for years, you know what an artist is not going to do? They're not going to care. Even if I said, this is the formula for a perfect song, they're not going to care, because why would they care about music exec opinion? Why they don't care, right? So there's a component of that where it's still the same with AI, right? When it comes down to in terms of AI music creation, at no point have I ever heard an artist say, you know what I would love to do is spend less time making music. I've never heard a serious artist say that, right? Yeah. If you are a person that's like doing it as a hobby, totally makes sense. You're like, cool, I just need the bits, I need some stems, I need et cetera, piece together. But all artists want to do is make music. All artists want to do all the time is make music, and all they talk about is making music. And they are deeply annoyed if they have to do anything that's not making music. So at what point do they say, hey, I want AI to make my music for me so I can do what? What are they going to be doing instead? I haven't figured out what they're meant to be doing if they're not making the music, basically. Yeah. So when it comes to opportunities in AI, what I see as opportunities a lot more is all the stuff the artist doesn't want to be doing, right? It's hey, you're listening to 103.9, but like they don't want to do that. Yeah. And so AI could help them record that and then convert that to every single other language and every single other station, et cetera, right? They don't want to be making content for TikTok. And so AI can help them do the content for the TikToks and do all those things, right? Like they don't want to be doing the music video. They don't want to be posting the content to socials. There's all kinds of stuff artists are asked to do constantly they absolutely don't want to be doing. But the thing they want to do is make music. And so building more and more tools so people can make AI music is, my question is still, who asked for this? Who wants that? Because it's not the artist. If it's the regular everyday consumer, cool, but that's not the world I work in. I don't care about the hobbyist consumer making music anyway. And then when it comes to threats, I think the biggest area when it does come to threats is going to be in the spaces for artists that are not brands or not looking to be a brand in and of themselves. And what I mean by that is AI music is likely going to be very detrimental to spaces that are basically lean back listening in entirety. That would be things like lo-fi music, like basically background music, elevator music, whatever you might call it. It would be the things where people don't really care who the artist is anyway, so they don't care that it was AI generated, essentially. Sync, for example, when it comes to like YouTube videos, things like that, I think is a huge threat, because I think that is where the AI music is going to thrive, because there's no pushback, right? Just because you release a AI version of a song that sounds like Beyonce, you don't care. Like it's a novelty to hear the Drake Weekend mashup, but you're not gonna be like, that's my new favorite band. And so I don't think there, as long as an artist are still brands that you care about and you connect with and you feel a community and sense of, belonging with that space, I don't think AI is going to be a threat in those spaces. It's definitely going to be a threat for artists that are not in those spaces, that are basically, musicians for hire. I think are going to struggle a lot more. And that's probably the biggest threat when it comes to AI. And then thinking about work, like outside of being an artist and AI, I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and I don't think it's being leveraged well. Partly because people are afraid, right? They're afraid that if they say, "Oh, I'm using AI to do this very menial, mundane thing," that is going to invalidate their job needing to exist. And so instead of evolving, they just pretend they're not using it. And I think there's so much opportunity there to actually, like, I remember being at label and someone, like, I'll talk to somebody and like a coordinator, they're young, right? I'm like, what's your job? What do you do? And they will show me what they do, and I'm like, oh, that all could be automated, like, but that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, because if that job, if the work they were doing was automated, they could actually go on and do something interesting. There was so much more opportunity for them to do interesting work, right? But because they get put in the weeds of doing something that is like, all right, I need you to go to New Music Friday and write down the position that this track is in, and all the New Music Fridays all over the world. And that takes you all day. That's 8 hours of your life that you could have been doing something interesting. You could have been coming up with an artist campaign. You could have been, doing something cool, interesting. And I think there's so much more opportunity for that. But we have to step away from this, like, you have to fill up your time doing this menial, mundane work and move it to, if the robots are going to do this thing, that opens up the opportunity for you to be a human, basically. Yeah. And if we start embracing opportunities to be a human instead, I think we can really work in tandem with AI rather than it being a threat to us.
I think that's quite a unique take. I don't think I've heard that take before.
I'm full of unique takes.
Really good food for thought. We're coming to the end of this podcast, and with every podcast, I always ask people, in different ways, what it means to be unstoppable for them. You've been a trailblazer, and that often means that you've walked a path that nobody else has walked before you. What does it mean to be unstoppable to you, and how do you continue to push through even when those challenges seem insurmountable?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, it's like I said, right? It's do it scared. Well, if you were the person stopping you much more frequently than you realize, right? Because even if it feels like, oh, I got the no from so-and-so, so I can't move forward, you can pivot. You can try something else. It's very easy to get in your own head and say, oh, well, I'm a failure. I don't belong here, et cetera, et cetera. But you do it scared. You do it. You keep doing it. And so, I mean, like, being unstoppable, I feel like sometimes in the very literal sense of the word is that you just keep going.
Yeah.
You have no other choice. Like, I knew I wanted to work in music since I was 12. Like, I just kept going. Even if I lived in a market where, like, there was no music industry, I just kept going. I worked at every radio station. I worked at every venue. I worked anywhere that had anything tangentially to do with music, because that's all I wanted to do. And if it's what you care about, then that's what you're going to have to do, basically.
Fantastic. Christine, you have so much energy. Your energy is contagious. Like, your outlook is so bright and positive, and you embody an unstoppable spirit. And I'm so glad that we had you on today. I've learnt loads. I'm sure our listeners, our viewers have learnt loads as well. And I just want to thank you for taking the time out, coming off that flight and making it across to us, and joining us for this podcast. And, it's been such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to be here. I've had a really good time. This has been a really fun experience. Thanks, Ben.
It's all good. It's all good. And for everybody out there that wants to know more about LinkedIn, make sure you come across to the Patreon, because you're gonna get some real exclusive ish over there. So make sure you signed up for that and you come over, you check that out. To everybody that's tuned in, thank you for joining us on this journey. Make sure you tune in for the next one. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, and remember, you have the power to choose your path in life, but whatever path you choose, always choose to be unstoppable.